Yes, it's difficult, but everything you do is difficult. No matter what path you choose in life, you're going to have challenges. So looking for things where you're kind of swimming in a blue ocean as opposed to, a red ocean, uh, can be more beneficial long term.
Welcome to the Wild West Real Estate Podcast. And now, here's your host, Mark Henteman. Today's guest is a single-family and multifamily investor, co-founder of Bar Down Investments. She's also the best-selling author of The Only Woman in the Room, Knowledge and Inspiration from 20 Women Real Estate Investors. She's additionally the co-host of the Passive Investing Show and runs a coaching program called Apartment Addicts. I'd like to welcome Ashley Wilson.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
Thanks for joining. I'm excited to hear your story. You got a lot going on there, and I'm excited to dig in. So first thing, this is my curiosity, is your company's called Bar Down Investments. Did I read somewhere that has something to do with like sports?
Yes. So both my husband and I, who co-founded the company together, were our athletes. It depends on how you look at it. My husband was a professional ice hockey player, and I played Division I field hockey, but I also compete nationally in riding, and I still do that today.
Oh, amazing. That's so cool. I didn't know that's a really impressive resume there.
Thank you. Thank
And what
you.
is bar down? What's that analogy?
Bar down is the best shot you can take in hockey, and it's also in soccer as well. And I've heard it used in other fields outside of sports, but in sports, it's when the puck or the soccer ball hits the top of the crossbar and then goes down into the net.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
considered one of the best shots that you can take in hockey specifically.
Impossible to defend, probably.
Impossible to defend, and it's also a really beautiful shot too. So we liked that analogy because obviously we're both athletes, but also too because of the fact that we feel that investing with us is your best shot with investing. So that's kind of the play on the terminology.
I love it. That's great. And where are you? Where are you guys based?
We are located outside of Philadelphia. I'm from here originally, but my husband's originally from a town called London, Ontario, which is about 2 hours due west of Ontario, or excuse me, Toronto in Ontario.
Toronto. Okay.
Yes.
Cool. And how did you start on your like real estate path?
Great question. So, my husband was obviously playing right out of college. He got drafted and he got traded around, and we reconnected after college. And I was working for a large pharmaceutical company. I was working for Sanofi Aventis at the time. So, both of us were doing fairly well early on in our careers. And we both did not believe in the stock market for a lot of reasons. So we were looking for alternative investments, and we liked how real estate was a tangible asset. We loved the tax benefits that real estate provided. So we started investing on the side. We continued our normal jobs, or as normal as my husband's job can be considered. And then we started buying rental properties. In fact, we bought short-term rentals and long-term rentals. And fast forward a few years, my father and I started a house flipping business, predominantly higher end historic homes. We've had that business for 8 years. And then about 4 years ago, we transitioned into buying large multifamily properties.
Oh, cool. How long ago was that?
4 years ago.
4 years ago. Okay. I like the historic homes that you guys brought them back to life.
Yes. So we would look for homes that range anywhere from 1890 to 1960 was really our sweet spot.
Okay.
Growing up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, there are a tremendous amount of homes that are of that vintage. coupled with the fact that most of them need a full gut renovation. My dad's a general contractor. He's had his own business for over 45 years. So it's just a natural fit that we could go into that niche. There's less competition in that space too, because most flippers go after kind of cupcake type flips where it's very easy to turn them over. But acquiring them is much more difficult because obviously there's more competition in that space as less people know how to do a full gut rehab.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like it's a much they just want to lay up um for the flippers do. And you're doing something much more significant than that, restoring them.
Absolutely. You have to be more well versed on codes, which my dad is, a walking encyclopedia of historic codes. He actually most of the time is educating code officials, and when inspectors come to inspect the progress of our property, he's so well versed in how homes were constructed historically. So he can provide a lot of guidance and education to inspectors, which lends itself well when we're trying to get through an inspection.
Sure.
So it just was a great fit for us when we first started trying to acquire these types of homes or flip. We first started to acquire flips. We had a very low conversion rate. And then once we switched over and got more into the higher end historic homes, we had a 1 in 7 offer conversion rate. So every 7 offers we made, we would have one accepted. It was just a more efficient use of our time to spend on acquisitions.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, and I bet there are some tax benefits. Are there tax benefits to taking on those kind of projects?
With flips, not necessarily, but you can argue you can get your real estate professional status. And obviously, I'm not a CPA, so you should
Okay.
ask your CPA. But the tax benefits that we have um, accessed and participate in are more tied to rentals. So
Rent.
we've been able to participate in significant deferral of taxes and reduction of our tax exposure due to investing in multifamily, which is a huge reason why we transitioned into that asset class.
Okay. I know just our the house that I live in is 1920, and we were able to get some tax our property tax is lower if we restore and do some upgrades to the property itself.
That's fantastic. Every single city, state, county, they all have some tax advantages that you can tap into, especially when you're going after historic homes. So there are opportunities that you can do that. There are also opportunities if you have larger parcels of land to get homestead farmland tax exemptions as well. You can really get creative. Ultimately, I advise that everyone should have a CPA that specializes in real estate tax advantages, because that will help you play the game of life much better and get on the winning side quicker.
Yeah, I had that same lesson is I had a general CPA firm, but as I got more into real estate, I felt like I needed to, and I did need to. I switched to someone who specialized in real estate, and they have a much broader knowledge of the ins and outs of real estate.
I
And
couldn't agree with you more.
what you said about doing your historic home acquisitions, uh, it's interesting, especially in a really crowded market like we are or have been for the last 5 years easily, is finding a niche that there isn't flooded with other operators. And you did that with your historic homes. It kind of reminds me of I did, and it was partially a function of the competition that was out there. But I had been doing this for 10 years. So I started taking distressed deals and I looked for some of the more distressed things. And you've got to be able to navigate the city and the city's requirements. In LA here, they have something called the REAP program, which sounds pretty ominous, but it is ominous. It's when they take a building away from an owner, and it's apartment buildings Like if there's just egregious violations and it's just not being maintained, and you'd pick them up off of owners that just didn't have the funds to repair what needed to be repaired. So the city would basically take over the property, and then I would come in and buy the property and have a long list of things to remedy.
I think when people focus on something as niche as that, it weeds out your competition. So whenever there's less competition, it typically correlates to higher profit margins. So I imagine that was probably a very lucrative venture for you, just like it was for us to go after flips that not as many people were going after. Yes, it's difficult, but everything you do is difficult. No matter what path you choose in life, you're going to have challenges. So looking for things where you're kind of swimming in a blue ocean as opposed to, a red ocean, uh, can be more beneficial long term because of those profit margins that present itself to you.
Yeah, and maybe you don't start with that, but after you've done this for a few years or something, it gives you a chance to flex, like
Yep.
try something new and take on a bigger challenge. And they're fun. I don't know. I found them to be fun and not too terrifying.
Me
Although
too.
once or twice I was scared that I wasn't going to be able to pull it off.
But I think
Um,
once you go through it the first time, then the second time is easier, the third time is easier. It's just that first time. And really, it's just because we don't have the knowledge when we go in the first time. We don't know what we don't know, even. And
right.
that is naturally a human characteristic that creates fear. But once you get more well versed, and if you're willing to push yourself past the comfort zone, it gets very comfortable very easy or very quickly.
Very quickly. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and it's fun. It allows you to continue growing, not
It
only
definitely does.
taking these challenges on, but you become a bit more of an expert. So how did you get into multifamily?
So when my husband retired from playing, which was about 5 years ago, we for 3 months did this kind of high school debate class between the two of us, where every Saturday night we debated an asset class in real estate. And we actually debated 22 asset classes.
No way. There are
Yes.
22
Yeah,
classes?
surprisingly, there are at least 22 that we could identify. And we did that for 3 months. And then literally every Saturday night, that was our
That
fun
was your
activity as a couple. And we landed on multifamily. We both liked all of the benefits that multifamily provided. We thought we had the necessary skill set to execute on multifamily, that it would be a good transition for us. So, like anything, once you figure out what you want to do, you really should broadcast it to the world, because a lot of people don't know what you're thinking or where you want to take your life. But I'm a firm believer in putting it out into the atmosphere. So I went and told everyone and anyone who would listen to me that this is something that I wanted to transition doing. But that's not where the the um the pivotal point was for me. The pivotal point was by leading with value. So I talk about this a lot, that most people will say what they want, but they won't say what they can give to get it. And that's the difference. Specifically, I knew that I was well versed with construction, growing up with my father's influence. And my mother, she managed a small business. So having those two influences of, in essence, construction management and asset management, made me the perfect person to take on that role in multifamily property. I tend to think of single family real estate as actual real estate investing. In multifamily, I actually think it's more business investing, and real estate's just attached to the business.
Okay, that's
So
fascinating. That's a good point.
it's different. It is different. And you're trying to maximize the business as opposed to um exclusively maximize the property. So that's why I think that you can maximize the property through add-on of units, or maybe you add on storage, or you rent out a cell tower. There are other ways you can do that, but your general operations of, your tenants and your residents on the property that's the business you're literally buying. So,
Yeah, what a great distinction. I love that. It kind of goes back to our historic property thing is like you can beautify buildings, but when you look at it like a business, what are you doing that's actually increasing their revenue?
nothing on single family, really. It's just the aesthetics on single family. You can't control the valuation 100% on single family, because if a neighbor sells their property for X amount, that sale, as long as it's a comp house, which most of the time is, impacts your property. Where in
Right.
multifamily, you can have two properties built by the same builder, same year, same specs, and one could be millions more than the other one just because of the operation. So that's why I personally believe that you're buying a business, you're not buying real estate. Um, so in
Yeah, that's right.
essence, I I put it out in the atmosphere what I wanted to do, but then I said, and this is the value I can provide. I can manage construction and I can manage the operations. I can execute on the business plan. And people knew my track record. They knew I had taken our flipping process from a 9.5 month renovation on a full gut um, renovation, and I had streamlined it to 9.5 weeks on a full gut rehab of about a 3,000 square foot house spec. That's what I was able to do that. So they've seen that firsthand. They also too knew I was well versed in construction. They know my background. They knew that the value that I was leading with was substantiated with experience. So what happened was, one of the individuals that I told, this is what I want to do, this is the value I can provide, do you know of anyone who is in need of this role to be filled on their team? And fortunately, in multifamily, most operators don't have someone on their team with construction knowledge. They typically outsource
Sure.
that entirely. So I was able to step into a team where they were under contract on a 124 unit property. And the building, while it was under contract, one of the buildings, excuse me, one of the buildings had burnt to the ground,
Oh, really?
and needed to be rebuilt because the insurance proceeds were being turned over to the purchaser, and they didn't know how to rebuild. They didn't know how to manage a construction project. So I was able to step in and do that. And estimations had the rebuild of the building taking about 9 months to a year. And I was able to start that project in July, and I had the CO by December, and I did it for significantly under budget. So I was able to do it for a little over 10% below the original budget, which is incredible. I mean, it's
That's
it's very
amazing.
good to be able to execute on that level. And that really was the floodgates opened after that, for me, of people coming and asking, if I wanted to manage their projects for them. And I looked at about 70 different projects, and I consulted on a few, about six. But then I only partnered with one group. And what I realized during that time is how aggressive people underwrite. And I didn't feel comfortable putting my
Right.
reputation on the line, because if at the end of the day, if the property doesn't execute, no one looks at the underwriter, they look at the operator.
Right.
And I wanted to make sure that my reputation stayed intact, that I took on projects that I believe that I could execute on.
Yeah.
So we 3 years ago decided to make a shift from partnering with other groups exclusively to, we'll take on something here and there if it fits our fundamentals, but otherwise we are pursuing things on our own. So really, even though Bar Down has been in existence for 4 years, in terms of us driving our path forward exclusively on our own, it that took shape about 3 years ago.
Okay. So you kind of made a shift. So you were just for clarity, like you joined someone who had like a 124 unit, and that's how you came aboard. And then you were working with different operators for a bit, and before going to where your direction now is as you're taking more control of the whole operation?
Yes. So we partnered with that group on the 124 unit 4 years ago. Then we partnered with another group um, about 9 months later on a 225 unit. I did the same thing. I ran asset and construction management. Also, at that same time, I consulted on 6 different projects for a few different pretty well known operators in this space, to be quite transparent. And this summer of 20, I guess it would be 2019, was the summer that I realized, this is something we could do on our own. So we started actively seeking deals. Before we weren't trying to acquire anything. We were trying to look for partners who already had deals under contract or
Sure.
had existing properties that were underperforming that we could partner and step in and reposition for them. But we quickly realized that there's a reason why the properties weren't doing well, and it's because they were never set up to do well in the first place, and nothing to do with their operations. It had more to do with the expectations that were set were so unrealistic that you couldn't even execute on them.
Yeah, so the partners that you were finding didn't have the same standards that you wanted,
No,
so
no,
you went off on your own.
they were just very aggressive. A lot of people I think were at that time just doing deals just to do deals and
Yep,
knowing that or thinking that the cap rates would carry them on sale, which most of them did. So,
right,
but that's not sustainable.
right.
As we're seeing right now, the cap rate expansion in the multifamily market, that hasn't been happening, for years. And there's a lot of new investors in this space that don't even realize that cap rates can also expand. They don't just compress.
Right.
So that's something that we knew was on the periphery because of just watching market cycles. And if you don't follow market cycles and market trends, not only by asset class, but also by market, you can get caught really quickly. And that's not exposure we wanted.
Yeah, if you don't, learn the lessons of history, you're doomed to repeat
We
them.
repeat them.
That's great. Yeah, I know. It does seem like there's a lot of really aggressive underwriting, and I wonder, like, how that happens. It's a kind of a head scratcher for a new operator to get in and just feel comfortable, underwriting so aggressively. Like, I would be terrified, especially if it's my first deal. Maybe it's like, is it the momentum of, like, big coaching programs or something that these new investors are unleashed, and it's like you got to find your deal, and the competitive nature causes you to go after something because you want to have something.
I think, I was a psychology undergrad, so I always look at things in terms of personalities and kind of understanding the why behind something. I think when you look historically, the people who entered the multifamily space, by and large, most coaching programs are championed by people who haven't been in the industry for super long. So, because of that, they had a lot of early on success. And that early on success was driven a lot by cap rates and not reflective of their operations. In fact, I don't know of any other program besides our program that teaches you how to run multifamily. In fact, our tagline is we teach you how to find, fund, and run apartments. Most coaching programs only teach you how to find and
Find
fund
deals.
them. And not to do a grim comparison, but I honestly say, between friends, it's kind of like the terrorists from 9/11 who only learned how to, fly a plane, but they never wanted to learn how to land the plane, right? And that to me is kind of what happened in multifamily is you had all these coaching programs come out from people who had huge profits, so they had experience to back it up, but ultimately that success was driven by an external factor, not themselves. And that's not all coaching programs. I'm not trying to lump everyone into that bucket, but by and large, majority, that's what happened. So the reason those coaching programs took off so successfully is typically those people are also really good at selling something. They were really good at selling the investment opportunity and getting investors from the get go. And they were also really good at selling a coaching program. And typically, people who are very good at selling something are normally typically not people who are very good at focusing on the details and wanting to be in the trenches of day-to-day operations. And that type of personality is the type of personality that you need to be um, operating these businesses. It's a completely different skill set. So I think that is, at least for me, that's how I look at it. Now, obviously, teams are built by a lot of different people. So hopefully, you have the support of all of these different roles on these different teams and you can build out structure. But that has been my kind of like takeaway from when I look at the industry as a whole, what I see that's going on. And then when you have all these new investors come in, they don't know what they don't know, and they're being advised by people with a track record. So they're just saying, okay, well, so and so tells me this is how I underwrite. And they're not going to know until they get in the thick of it and it's too late. They've acquired the property, they didn't set
Right.
aside enough reserves, let alone, CapEx, let alone reserves, because most people are not even setting enough aside for CapEx. And then they're like, what is an operating reserve account? Like, like
Yeah.
if
Right.
the fact that a lot of people don't know that is very scary. Especially, where we're at today in terms of the market cycle. So
Right. Your
I
point
think it keeps going. No, go ahead.
keeps going. Yeah. Yeah. I like your point about different personalities. I had invested since 1999 on my own. And it wasn't until I built my team that I realized I thought I was doing just fine. I had made it through '08 and the Great Recession. But when I formed a team and I brought in, one of my key partners is total engineering background. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So you're going to do this at a different level.
Yeah.
And I bet then I've been doing it, and it's nice when you find those people, but you need a team that has a variety of skills.
Couldn't agree more. Everything that my husband does in the business, I can't do, and vice versa. It's a completely different skill set. He was a physics undergrad. He's a spreadsheet. He was going to go into engineering before he got drafted. I'm psych, operational mindset. It literally, we have complementary skill sets. We have the same, driving force, end goal in common. And just like my partner now, my partner, Jay Scott. So my husband's slowly exiting the business, but my partner, Jay Scott, and I, we have complementary skill sets, but we still are experts on different aspects of the business. And that's what you need to continue to drive the business forward.
Yeah, that's great. Jay's great. And it's a wonderful thing when you put together these very different personalities and it becomes this machine that is greater than all of you.
Yes, it really is. It is so nice in multifamily when you start scaling to have all these experts around you that are experts in these different aspects of the business, because it allows you to truly be an expert and own your side of the business because you're not pulled in so many different directions. Um, it's very hard to manage all of them at an expert level. So to be able to rely on other people is hugely beneficial to growing.
Absolutely. And I haven't figured out or I haven't heard where you're investing. Like, what are the geographies and what type of building as well?
Our current portfolio is exclusively in Houston. We're looking outside of Houston. We've sold some properties that have been outside of Houston, but what we have remaining is exclusively in Houston. And we're buying large apartment buildings. Typically, we say 150 units, but we prefer 200 units or more. And we're buying anywhere from late 1970s to we're really looking at all the way up to 2010
Okay.
type properties,
So
maybe a
BC, is that BC?
B and C class.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
predominantly. Mhm.
And how long ago did you make the decision to focus on Houston and why? What were the criteria that you were looking for and found there?
Houston was the location of, well, it was in a suburban market of Houston, was that first foray that I got involved in, the 124 unit. But once we were there, once I once we're there, I wanted to look into the market demographics when I was doing the due diligence on like partnering with them. And Houston reminded me of Pittsburgh.
Oh,
So
really?
stay with me on this.
Yeah,
When I
yeah.
was growing up, Pittsburgh was known as the Steel City. And about 15 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe 20 years ago, but around that time, Pittsburgh transitioned from being a steel city to
Tech.
it is a tech city now.
Yeah.
And most people, even still today, think of Pittsburgh as the steel city. The stigma, even though the economic factors of a city can change, it's unbelievable how many people don't follow the economic contributors of a market and watch those shifts. It's unbelievable. Most people don't. So
Right.
what ends up happening is they find out after the fact. Well, investors, they watch market trends and watch economic contributors to a market very closely, especially very successful investors. And all of the changes that were occurring in that market made it a very good city to invest in. So now people are saying, oh, Pittsburgh's such a good city. And then they go into it and they can't find anything. Well, that's because all the investors went into it 15 years ago.
Right.
I think the exact same thing of Houston. Houston
And
is no, oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, yeah, in Pittsburgh, compared to Houston, the population of Pittsburgh is smaller. It's a smaller market,
It's
right?
definitely a smaller market, but the stigma remains. So Houston, everyone says, "Oh, Houston's an oil and gas city. Why would you invest in an oil and gas city?" When with all the
The volatility.
fluctuate the
Yeah.
volatility, fluctuation in the pricing and etc. Well, I don't think most people know that oil and gas is only an economic contributor to the Houston economic system of 2.4%. And when you take fringe industries, it's 7.4%. So that means like all the supporting industries, right? So the fact that most people don't know that makes me like it even more. It's the eighth contributor to the economy. It's also to one of the most affordable cities, major MSAs to live in the country. It is the number one city for expats to start a business in. It is a business friendly state. There are also very lax zoning regulations in Harris County in Houston, which allows you to really use the highest and best use for land. The Texas in general is a landlord friendly state, so
Right.
that lends itself well, but the city of Houston is. The Houston Apartment Association is the largest apartment association in the entire country. So a lot of policies in the apartment industry kind of roll out in Houston first and then get expanded across the entire country. So it just is on the forefront and most people don't even recognize it. So I think more people are starting to recognize it now. Penske just issued their top moving destination report for 2021. Houston was number one over Austin, over Boise, over DFW, and Houston was number six the previous year. So I think people are starting to recognize it now, and it's getting a little bit
Yeah.
more competitive.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. You don't want
But it's
you
still
don't want
good.
all these investors flooding.
Yeah.
You've got a great market, with less competition.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I love your comments about analyzing the economics of a city, of a market. You also chose a giant market, which is hugely beneficial. We kind of do that on our end. We in LA and in Denver, we like big markets because there's just more deals to look at. I always felt like I could when anybody would ask me like, how do you find deals? I was like, in LA, there's 20 million people in the county of LA. I could find a deal in a half hour
Yeah.
on any given day. There's just so much inventory, so much mom and pop, old, B and C class that if you're in that tier, it's just an endless playground. But also, I wanted to do just highlight, some of your great points is analyze, in investors should be doing this. Lay people don't, but if you're not as an investor, you've got to be tracking job growth, income growth, rent growth, uh, diversity of industry. Like you highlighted that there's a myth that Houston is all oil and gas. when it's really way more diverse than that. Um,
Absolutely. And another factor that I personally look at is recession resistance. So I have my own calculation as to how I deem a city to be more recession resistant versus another. But some of the contributing factors are the economic diversity within that market. And I also look at recession rate, historic recession rate, apex of recessions, how a market stabilized post previous recessions, and how the economic makeup of that market was in prior recessions and how it is compared to today. So that's another factor that I find that Houston is very strong on. So that's something that is a major influencer when we're selecting markets, because especially when you consider the fact that we are, in terms of the market cycles, pre-COVID, actually, Houston was in coming out of a recessionary time for within multifamily. There were only two markets in the entire country that were Houston and Little Rock. And that lent itself to be very good for investing in Houston. If we hadn't had COVID, other markets would have, based off of market cycles and where every other market was, most of the other markets were coming into a hyper supply and at the tail end of the hyper supply and transitioning into a recessionary market or a recessionary cycle. But Houston and Little Rock were transitioning out of recession. They were a market cycle ahead of the rest of the country. So that's
that's a
something
great
too that we look at.
Okay, that's a great point. And where you know, is it the IRR report that you're using? Where do you find that information?
I do use the IRR report, but we get data sources from everywhere. I mean, we are a lot of times you can find some really cool information from small local brokerages. They are really tapped into the market as opposed to national brokerages. National brokerages also send out reports, like Marcus and Millichap send out their
Yeah,
reports.
market reports.
Yep. The census, we use data from the Census Bureau. We also use data from the cities. So the local municipalities have their own data sources that they'll share and issue through reports. And we basically collate all of the data and then do kind of like a thermometer type of analysis between, hot, cold, medium temperature rating of markets. And that helps us guide us as to, should we continue pursuing this market? Should we, shift in to another market? Should we exit this market, or should we add a market? And we typically do that around, and we were doing it less frequently pre-COVID, but then once COVID happened, we amped it up because how quickly things were changing in the markets. But we typically like to do it about biannually, because if you look at it on more of a micro scale, you don't see those trends as clear. So it's harder to identify the data and what you should do if you're looking at it on too narrow of a view.
Okay, yeah, that's all great things to track, and investors should know that that obviously every market is unique and its own economy, and it's on its own cycle. You can't just assume that the whole country is acting as one market. Every market is different.
Yep.
And I love like all the diversity of industry that you described that's in Houston that maybe people aren't aware of, and to your advantage of knowing like all those recession resistant and especially oil and gas recession resistant industries. And I know we do that on our own. And I would just add a couple that are always nice to have is seats of government, major universities. I know there's universities in Houston that always add a little bit of a buffer against recessions. College students continue going to college, and government agencies continue.
Also, too, when you look at medical, so medical tends to be pretty steady. And Houston, I mean, just another plug for Houston, but the medical within Houston has its own zip code. That's how
Wow.
many people are there. I don't remember the exact statistics, but I think it's 130,000 people a day visit the hospital. And I believe they employ like 103,000 or somewhere around there, in the medical district, within Houston. So they have become, if not the global, largest medical area, I believe nationally they are ranked number one. I don't think there's any other area in the entire country that has a larger medical presence.
That's amazing. Yeah, I grew up in Cleveland, and Cleveland's got a pretty big, I think the major employer in that city. But yeah, that's good and very recession proof as well. The medical community,
Yes.
everybody's they're not going to wait for the recession to go away to
Seek
get
treatment.
cured.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has been great. I love these topics. These are topics that we really don't go down the rabbit hole on a lot. And it's great. You have so much info on those. Yeah, maybe shift to some other questions like what's a daily habit that brings you the most benefit?
Meditation,
Meditation?
for sure. Probably meditation and exercise, I would say, brings the most benefit in terms of keeping my energy high. Obviously, spending time with my family is that brings me joy and happiness. And that's the whole reason I'm doing this. But in terms of just keeping the energy high, driving me forward, that's what really gives it to me. And I either run or ride every single day.
What do
So
you when you say ride horses?
ride horses. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, awesome. Awesome. I love that. Yeah. Running. I'm a runner and
I love it.
meditation, great way to get settled, get centered as well. Is there a failure or mistake you made early on that later you found was key to your success?
There are so many that we could have
All
a
of them?
whole show. All of them
Right.
really are key to the success that I have today. The number one, I would say, because it was the hardest for me to get over, was hiring. I was really against hiring because I had a fear of thinking that bringing on more people was more mouths to feed as opposed to more hands to sew. And once I realized that concept, that if you're not bringing on someone that doesn't exponentially grow your business, then either that hire was not needed or you brought on the wrong hire.
That's great. What was the saying you said? More mouths to feed,
And
more hands to sell or something?
yeah, instead of thinking that when you bring on a new hire, it's more mouths to feed, it's actually more hands to sew.
I love that. That's great. Let's see. Yeah, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing today that in your business?
The biggest challenge we're facing today are a couple things. One is finding the right deals that make sense for where we want to take our company. Number two is finding the right capital. The cost of capital drives everyone's power to acquire because your cost of capital is a direct correlated variable that says whether or not you can acquire a property or not. If your cost of capital is 1% and my cost of capital is 15% in terms of investors, you're going to acquire almost everything, really. So it's very difficult to compete when you get into the space of competing against its institutional capital because institutional capital doesn't need as great of returns. That's challenging to figure out where you should position yourself to buy. I mentioned before we prefer units that are 200 or greater. Well, that gets into competing against institutional buyers. And then last but not least is being very intentional about the company we want to build. So that's a challenge that we're working through, the structure and the components that make our company a well-oiled machine that everyone is on the same page about. So that's a constant, you always have to have a temperature check on that, make sure that everyone's aligned and feels that they have the tools necessary to be successful, because that's what will drive more success if someone feels that they are successful or have the capability of being successful.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. This has been so good. I love the roads that we've gone down. And are you ready for our question round?
Sure.
Here we go. The book you've recommended most over the past year.
Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I guess. I feel like everyone should read that book, but it's so obvious that I hate that that's my answer.
Yeah. No, it's a great one. Do you have a favorite quote?
Don't mistake my kindness for weakness.
Great. I've never heard that one, but I love it. Aside from real estate, one thing you could spend all day talking about.
Horses.
Horses.
I mean,
What-
I guess I should answer my kids. Should that be my answer? But horses, I could spend
I
all day
love
talking
it. I
about
like
horses
horses better.
too.
Um, what decade created the greatest music?
Oh my gosh. I love music. I love all types of music. Oh, okay. Well, my favorite band is Queen.
Okay.
So, but I wouldn't say 80s created the best, right?
Yeah.
Because they were the 80s, they were
They
early
were
80s, right?
70s, 80s. They
70s,
kind of
80s. Okay, so I'll say
straddled
like
both
60s,
decades.
70s, 70s, 70s.
70s? Yeah. Classic rock.
Classic
You
rock.
you grew up in a classic rock town. It sounds like, and I did. Cleveland was 100% classic rock town
Well,
to the point where it was like you didn't catch up on music until like later. Is there a high school friend you'd like to say hello to?
My best friend is Jonna, and I've been friends with her ever since elementary school, and she's been a huge support system for me throughout my entire life. She's also my maid of honor, and I was her matron of honor.
Oh, awesome. I love that. Lifelong friends.
Yep,
And when are you happiest?
with my family.
You didn't say horses this time.
Horses can be a little frustrating at times. I mean, I guess your family can be too, but
Yeah.
it's all a memory that builds to the strength and the dynamic of your family. So
Yeah. Great. And finally, how can listeners reach out to you?
they can contact me through our website, which is bardowninvestments.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at badashinvestor.
Awesome. Well, we'll put that in the notes. And thank you so much, Ashley. This was great. I love, like I mentioned, I love the roads we went down. So much good information.
Thank
Uh,
you so much. I had such a fun time. I really love to, obviously stay in touch. And if you ever need anything, as I mentioned to you and Jamie at Podfest, just reach out and we're happy to help with
likewise,
anything.
likewise, you guys
Seriously.
are operators that I admire and respect, and I know
Thank
you
you.
guys are going to kill it. So good,
Thank you.
good for you guys.
You too. You too. You guys already are killing it. I can't get over like how much you guys are doing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
well,
Thank you so
good.
much, Ashley.
You're welcome and good luck today. Have
Thank you.
fun.
All right, thanks.
All right.
See ya.
Okay, bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Wild West Real Estate Show. If you like what we're attempting to do here, please subscribe so we can continue sharing these with you. And if you want to check out our website, it's quantumcapitalinc.com. You'll find podcast episodes as well as multifamily properties we're looking at and how you could potentially participate. Look forward to seeing you guys soon on the Wild West Real Estate Show.